views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to OpenBXRX Tuesday, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and today is Primary Election Day, Tuesday, June 22nd. Coming up, we'll discuss gender identity and LGBTQ plus youth support with LGBTQ plus healthcare equality leader, Montefiore. Then, Transportation Alternatives joins us to share more about their hashtag NYC25by25 vision, safer on street for pedestrians and cyclists. After that, we'll learn more about homeowning in the Bronx and steps you can take to get there with local real estate agents from Moravilla Sales Team. And today is Election Day, June 22nd. We're re-airing one of our segments with AARP to share what you need to know and what to expect on your ballot. So please stick around. OpenBXRX Tuesday starts now. Welcome to OpenBXRX Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. Pride Month continues to be a celebration of our LGBTQ plus community. And as an LGBTQ plus healthcare equality leader, Montefiore provides leading edge care to the community. And one doctor is raising awareness about important terms to know, understand, and use appropriately when interacting with the LGBTQ plus community. Joining us now to share more is Dr. Lauren T. Roth, Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at Montefiore. Welcome, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Lauren Roth, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm a general pediatrician at a Montefiore clinic called the Comprehensive Family Care Center. I'm also an assistant professor at Einstein College of Medicine, and I co-chair the LGBTQ Special Interest Group of the Academic Pediatric Association, which is a national group dedicated to increasing education about pediatric LGBTQ health for current and future pediatricians. My brother's transgender, so I've learned a lot about the trans experience on a personal level, and I spent the last 5 years teaching students, residents, and faculty about child and adolescent LGBTQ health.
Thank you so much for sharing, Doctor, and we're so happy to have you serving our LGBTQ plus community here in the Bronx in particular. So thank you for your work. So first, I'd like to learn about Montefiore's healthcare equality designation and the importance of leading an LGBTQ plus inclusion.
So every year, the Human Rights Campaign recognizes healthcare facilities that are dedicated to LGBTQ inclusion of their patients and employees. Montefiore has been designated a leader in healthcare equality for the past 5 years for its excellence in inclusive patient care, community engagement, staff training, and overall commitment to LGBTQ health awareness and inclusion. It's so important for hospital systems to have inclusive policies and staff training to make sure our patients feel it's a safe space for them to be honest about who they are and receive the healthcare they deserve.
Absolutely agree. And what are some of the services that are available to our LGBTQ plus community at Montefiore? I hear there's also a trans wellness center. Can you share more about that as well, Doctor?
Of course. The Trans Wellness Centers at Montefiore is actually a new name for a group of doctors, social workers, and other staff who for years have been providing safe and inclusive care for transgender and non-binary patients in the Bronx. It's directed by Dr. Robert Beal with the help of Montefiore's amazing transgender health specialist, Octavia Lewis, who is a woman of transgender experience and who provides such an important perspective for how we can best care for our patients. Our services at Montefiore range from primary care for children and adults, mental health care, reproductive health, gender-affirming care, which can include puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and we have a wide range of surgeries and other treatment options that are tailored to the transgender and non-binary community.
Such good information to share with our community, especially, our transgender community who often is not included in the healthcare communication or conversation. It's really hard to access a lot of these services that are so necessary to our community. So, Doctor, you have been raising awareness about important gender terms. Can you help walk us through these terms and what they mean?
Absolutely. So I've used the term transgender already. Someone who is transgender identifies as a gender that's different from the sex that a doctor assigned them at birth. When we talk about gender identity, we mean how a person describes their internal and personal sense of what their gender is. Sometimes it matches the chromosomes and the genitals that they were born with, but sometimes it doesn't. And gender expression is how we express ourselves on the outside. So how we dress, how we act, what names and what pronouns we use. There's also a term non-binary, which means just someone who doesn't necessarily identify with the categories of woman or man. They may identify as both, as neither, or somewhere in between on that gender spectrum. And when we talk about younger children, we often use the term gender expansive. These children may not necessarily follow the social norms of gender. For example, a child who was assigned male at birth, who likes to play with dolls and do ballet. It doesn't mean they're transgender. They're just exploring what gender means to them, and often at a really early age. I really want to emphasize the language we use is so important, especially as children get older. Puberty can be a really difficult time, especially when kids start to develop sexual characteristics that may not necessarily match how they feel inside, and that can be incredibly distressing for them.
Thank you, doctor, for breaking that down. I think it's important to have this conversation and to break down these terms, especially when it comes to interacting with our youth. And, cross-generationally, some people may not understand the terms or, know what they mean or how to use them. So it's important to break these down, and we appreciate you joining us to help us out with that. So I wanted to discuss some challenges, common challenges that our LGBTQ plus youth face, whether that be in school, workplace, etc. Doctor, if you can just share some of those challenges with us.
Of course. This is always a hard topic for me because the statistics are so upsetting. And I really think it's important to focus on the positives of the LGBTQ plus community. But of course, we need to highlight why it's so critical to be supportive of our LGBTQ youth. They have higher rates of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, bullying, weapon use, intimate partner violence. 40% of LGBTQ plus youth have attempted suicide. And one of the greatest concerns is homelessness. Kids can be kicked out of the home, rejected from their family, or experience physical or sexual abuse at home. But I want to talk about resiliency because these kids are also so strong and brave and resilient. And when they are supported by their friends and their family and influential adults like teachers and doctors, they really thrive.
Right. And I can't believe I had to ask about this, but just about humanizing the transgender community as well, doctor, if you can just share, how we can take those steps as a community to just include our, LGBTQ plus, especially transgender community in the community.
Yeah, I think the word you said, normalize, like this is a normal thing. And we have to understand that gender is on a spectrum. There's not just men and women. There is a spectrum of different levels of, masculinity and femininity. And we just need to support and respect all of those people, anyone you encounter.
Doctor, I know you mentioned that your brother is transgender. How did you get into this field? And can you share a little bit about, that journey with your brother and your family?
Yeah, absolutely. So during my residency training, actually, I was training to be a pediatrician. My brother was in his first year at college, and he came back over winter break and sat down my family. I grew up with a sister and said, you know what, I'm transgender, I'm a guy. And, he had been suffering for so many years and was really depressed. And, we all just felt guilty. I really felt like, how did we miss something like this? Why didn't we ask earlier? Why did he have to live until 21 in the gender that he didn't identify with? And he was really lucky because my family was so supportive. But this really kind of pushed me to say, why aren't we talking to other doctors and teachers and other people that really influence these kids and say, ask the right questions, be supportive of them. So that maybe my brother would have been able to come out earlier on in life and gone through the transition earlier.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that personal anecdote, doctor. And that's something that I wanted to ask about as well. How can adults and family members or friends engage in supportive conversations with our youth? Can you share some steps and tips that may be helpful to us?
Of course, this is my favorite topic because I think there's so many ways adults can be supportive. And I think we really have to make an effort to support our kids. So it honestly starts at birth or even before. I really think we need to try to stop making everything pink and blue avoid these huge gender reveal parties. It's okay to be excited when you find out your baby is a specific sex. People have dreams about what they want their families to be, but it's really important not to push all those expectations on your child. Toddlers start to notice physical differences and develop gender identity as early as 18 months to 2 years. They might begin talking about gender, playing dress up, having these established gender roles as early as age 3 or 4. Right. And, if your child was assigned male at birth and one day they tell you, I want to wear a pink sparkly dress, instead of saying what a lot of people say, boys don't wear dresses, girls do. Mm-hmm. Saying something like, tell me more about why you want to wear a dress today. Be open and curious and just start the conversation. And I really think having open conversations like that and just asking questions allows your child to share a little bit about themselves. And it shows that you support them and it gives them the space to explore who they are. It's really important as kids are growing up to provide them options of toys that might include classically masculine or feminine toys. Just give them everything and let them play with what they want. Read books that don't show stereotypical gender roles, like include stay-at-home dads or female firefighters or male nurses, and that include same-sex parents or gender diverse protagonists. I think it's so important to just give exposure to all different kinds of people. And as kids get older, it's okay to just ask them, describe what your gender is, or something as simple as, when I fill out your school form this year, what do you want me to put for gender? And leave it open-ended and let them answer. I haven't mentioned a lot about sexual orientation, but I really want to emphasize that who someone is attracted to is completely separate from their gender identity. Mm-hmm. It's really important not to make assumptions, right? Don't say things like, do you have a boyfriend? Because if they actually like girls or they're bisexual, it might give them the impression that you might not support them if they did come out to you. You can ask in a broader way, like, are you attracted to boys, girls, both, neither? You might not necessarily get an honest answer right away, but you open up that discussion and it doesn't put the burden on them coming out to you. It shows that you're interested and you support them no matter what. Another thing I would say is just pay attention to what you say around children. Like if you're watching a TV show about a gay couple or watching the news about transgender kids playing sports, just know that your kids are always listening. And when you say supportive things, it can make a huge difference. Like when you're watching that TV show, say how great that gay couple is, or that trans kids should play whatever sport they're comfortable with. So that really has a huge impact on how your child views the rest of the world. And it might give them the confidence and security they need to be honest with you about who they are. And my best advice is just to be supportive no matter who they are and who they love.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Roth. And the main theme here is, creating that safe space for our youth just to feel supported and feel included in these conversations. So thank you for that. So Montefiore is celebrating Pride Month and beyond Pride Month, still providing services to our LGBTQ plus community. But I want to take this moment to just share that Montefiore is having a 2021 virtual Pride. So can you just share how viewers can stay in touch and find out more about these upcoming events?
Of course. So every year, cities around the globe celebrate Pride Month in June. In 2016, Montefiore was actually the first healthcare system ever to have a float at the New York City Pride Parade. So Montefiore has had a huge part in Pride for years. And this year, we'll have a strong presence. It will be at the virtual march on June 27th. All the details haven't been released yet, but you can follow our Twitter at Montefiore New York City. And the other Twitter account I would just mention is Trans Wellness Centers at Montefiore, because we talked about that a little today.
Got it. Thank you so much, Dr. Roth, for joining us, and happy Pride to you and to Montefiore.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We'll be right back here on Open BXRX Tuesday.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community, and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from Bronx, this is Trans.
Welcome back. The increasing surge of biking during the pandemic has also brought some startling stats. In 2020, the Bronx saw the biggest increase in pedestrian and cyclist deaths. In an effort to make our streets safer for cyclists and pedestrians alike, Transportation Alternatives is proposing a challenge to put our street space to better use under the NYC 25 by 25 vision. Joining us now to discuss this and more is Erwin Figueroa, Director of Organizing at Transportation Alternatives. Welcome, Erwin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invite.
Of course. So as we discussed, as we mentioned in the introduction, according to data collected by Transportation Alternatives, the Bronx saw the biggest increase in pedestrian and cyclist deaths last year. Can you share more on this and help us understand why this trend rose so significantly last year?
Yeah, so what we saw last year was, unfortunately, a combination of problems that we had in the city. First, of course, we had the pandemic, and that disrupted how traffic moved in the city in major way. One, we had an increase of people driving. With the start of the pandemic, there was a call for people to try to avoid public transit. New York City as a whole, the majority of people commute via public transit, especially in the Bronx, has one of the highest riderships of public transit, both on buses and subway. And then also as well, we saw for those that were also trying to avoid public transit, they couldn't afford a car, were biking. So we saw an increase of people biking, and the numbers were reflected on the bridges. The counters were much higher than in previous years for people biking. That, along with the lack of infrastructure in the Bronx specifically, has led to what we saw last year, a high increase of fatalities with cyclists. The Bronx has, unfortunately, one of the least amounts of protected bike lanes in the entire city, where Manhattan has more than half of them in the entire city. The Bronx has about 4 to 5% of protected bike lanes of all the mileage in the city. So it's really a combination of more cyclists on the streets, less traffic, which allows cars to go faster, and then also no safe infrastructure for cyclists to be able to bike safely.
Right. Thank you, Erwin. And when you talk about that infrastructure in the Bronx, can you break down what some of those factors are or those safety hazards are for cyclists, particularly here in our borough?
Yeah. So for cyclists, the most important thing that brings to safety is having a clear lane that has no obstructions. And unfortunately, in the Bronx, as I mentioned before, when I talk about protected bike lanes, what I'm talking about is bike lanes that make it either extremely difficult or impossible for a vehicle to be able to park, to block, or to drive through that bike lane. We see a lot of bike lanes in the Bronx that are just literally just paint on the ground, where there's a lane painted right next to a parking lane, which puts cyclists in the line of a car door opening, or you have drivers that double park and they're blocking that painted lane, which forces cyclists to go into a travel lane. And that's what a lot of the crashes are happening when cars are going, when cyclists are going from a bike lane into the general lane. That's where the conflict is happening, and that's where the biggest safety hazard for cyclists is.
TA recently also released data on the dangers that SUVs pose to cyclists. Can you share more on this data, Erwin?
Yeah. So for a very long time, there's been in terms of safety, the safety ratings that we have for vehicles have been in focus on the safety of the passengers inside the vehicle. Mm-hmm. Yet a lot of the fatalities that we're seeing in New York City streets, and just as a whole, as a country, are based on traffic violence, what we call it, which is like cars, drivers crashing their vehicles, and that impacts either other drivers, motorists, cyclists, or pedestrians. And we've seen an increase of the amount of SUV purchases in our streets, and that's you don't even have to look at the stats. You can just walk outside and see there's a lot more cars in the streets, and those cars tend to be bigger than cars in previous decades. And what that means is like there's less visibility for drivers to be able to actually see pedestrians, especially young kids. You can easily see that if you're driving a big vehicle like an SUV or a pickup truck, it's less likely you'll be able to see any pedestrian that is below 5 feet. And it really, we want to make sure that people know when they're buying these vehicles that there's a higher chance of, if you were to be on a traffic crash, impact pedestrian or cyclist, then the likelihood of dying is higher. And what we saw as well was that last year, out of the 29 cyclists that were killed, actually, I'll say 2019, out of the 29 cyclists that were killed, 25 of them involve a truck, a bus, a SUV, or a van. These are large vehicles that are predominantly involved in traffic crashes that result in fatalities for cyclists.
All right. Thank you for sharing, Erwin. And I understand that Transportation Alternatives has a few suggestions to make streets safer for cyclists and pedestrians. Can you share what hashtag NYC 25by25 is and how the community can advocate to improve street safety in streets like Westchester Avenue in the Bronx?
Yeah, so 25by25 is a challenge that we're giving out to every single person running for office in this election season. So what we're asking them is, New York City as a whole, we cannot expand. We are a very dense, congested city, and this status quo doesn't work for the majority of New Yorkers. We all have been stuck in traffic. We all have been waiting like 10, 20, 30 minutes for a bus, especially in the Bronx. And as cyclists, we've been in situations where, like we may get hit by a car. And also, it's important to know that we have the solutions for all these problems. And the solution is to give the space back to people and reclaim it back from automobiles. So how do we do that? There's a lot of different ways that you can reclaim that space and give it back to people so that we have a just, equitable city. And that is, you can, as I mentioned, protected bike lanes, dedicated busways, space for trash containers so that our sidewalks are not congested, so there's more people that can walk and they're not forced to walk on the street. And also open streets, streets that are open for everyone so that both cars, people can commingle and cars can enter as an invited guests, but they don't get to dictate the rules of the street, that we can have our children and everyone in our community be able to use that street in front of their house as an extension of their front yard and get to meet neighbors and get to experience what New York is about in a way that is safe for all.
So kind of like what we've seen in the pandemic with the restaurants having open streets and kind of designated areas for these restaurants and businesses to allow people to just enjoy the street rather than having cars go through, right?
Exactly. And, and with our report of 25by25, we actually looked at 5 different types of streets of how can you convert those streets into what would be a 25by25 street. And in the Bronx, we picked Westchester Avenue and Prospect Avenue. That intersection, as we all know, is a very busy intersection. It's an intersection that is, the geometry is very difficult because it doesn't come at right angles. And they have about 5 to 6 different intersections, like places there to cross. And also is below the elevated train. So there's a lot of competition for space. And what we know of that space is that one is one of the hearts of the community of the South Bronx. There's a lot of mobile vendors, there's a lot of street vendors there, and there's a lot of pedestrians there. So in order to be able to reclaim that space, we want to look at how can we give more space to the current use of that intersection, which is like street vendors and pedestrians and buses, and also what else can be done with this new added space. So it's a matter of having more space for people, not necessarily like having to eliminate all car lanes. You can integrate that space so that the balance of public space. Streets are about 80% of the entire public space in the entire city. Yet, and pedestrians and cyclists and public transportation users are the majority of people that move around the city that use the street. Yet they have the least amount of space dedicated to them. So it's just like fixing that imbalance of how our streets is dedicated for.
Got it. Now, Erwin, I do want to have some time to talk about the Crash Victims' Rights and Safety Act. Can you tell us a little bit more about it and what it proposes? What are the bills within that Safety Act?
Yeah, so this is a package of bills that we're pushing up in Albany in order to save lives, bring restitution, and bring justice to people that are impacted by traffic violence, and also prevent dangerous behavior from drivers to take the lives of people. So it's about 8 bills, and I can talk about a little bit about all of them. One of them is called Sammy's Law, which is named after one of the members of Family for Safe Streets, which is one of our sister organizations that are there to provide support for anyone that has lost loved ones or been impacted by traffic violence. So Sammy's Law, what they would do is it would allow the New York City to determine the speed limits of every street. So right now, for any change of speed limits in New York City, we need to go to Albany and get authorization. And that means that the people that know best the streets in New York City don't get to decide how fast a car can go to. And if you have a street that, like you have a lot of speeding going through, you are not able right now to request your council member or even to request the mayor to change the speed limit. Another one is the Crash Victim Bill of Rights, which is to guarantee rights and voice for crash victims and their loved ones in legal proceedings. We also want to see speed cameras 24/7, which would allow New York City to have this life-saving technology be available 24/7. The Dangerous Driving Act to hold the most reckless drivers accountable and prevent future crashes. The Vehicle Safety Rating and Labeling, which I talked about a little bit earlier, to give people more information about the cars that they're buying and to think about the safety of others outside of their vehicles. Reducing the blood alcohol content limit for DWI from 0.08 to 0.05, the right to safe passage, which would require drivers to pass cyclists at a safe distance of at least 3 feet, and the DMV pre-licensing to educate New York drivers about safely interacting with vulnerable road users.
Thank you so much, Erwin, for your time. I wish we had more time, but before we go, I wanted to share that TA does have an upcoming event. We want to invite the Bronx to come out and join you for the Ghost Bike Memorial Ride. Can you just tell us when it's taking place and how people can join?
So we'll be having our 5th annual Transportation Alternatives Bronx Ghost Bike Memorial Ride. This will be happening Saturday, June 26th at 9:30 a.m. We'll meet up at Lou Gehrig Plaza, and we'll be traveling to all the ghost bikes that commemorate cyclists that have been killed in Bronx streets throughout the years, and to give a message to the elected officials that we need to end the fatalities in our streets that involve cyclists and pedestrians, and then we need infrastructure in order to be able to do that.
Thank you so much, Erwin, for your time today. We'll be right back here on OpenBXRX Tuesday. This year, New York City began using ranked choice voting in primary and special elections for local offices, such as mayor, public advocate, comptroller, borough president, and city council. Ranked choice voting means that voters can rank up to 5 candidates in order of preference, instead of casting a vote for just one. You can still vote for just one candidate if you prefer. So, how will your ballot look? Your ballot will look the same as always, except now there will be a checkbox with ranking numbers depending on how many candidates there are in a race. So how does it work? If your first choice gets over 50% of votes, they automatically win the race. If none of the candidates get more than 50% of votes on the first round, then the candidate with the least amount of votes gets eliminated, and the votes get recounted again in a second round of counting. Here's an example. Let's rank colors. I like blue the most, so I'm marking it 1. I like purple 2nd, green 3rd, and orange 4th. Okay, my votes are in. Now other votes are counted and the results are as follows. Blue earned 36%, purple earned 27%, green earned 19%, and orange earned 18%. As you can see, none of these colors earned more than 50% of the votes. So the one with the smallest amount of votes gets eliminated. Voters who chose orange as their first choice now have their votes distributed to their second choice. This continues until a candidate receives 50% of the votes and becomes the official winner of the race. That's it. That's ranked choice voting. Ready? Let's vote. Welcome back. According to Data USA, in 2018, the home ownership rate in the Bronx was 18.5%, which is lower than the national average of 63.9%. Have you ever considered putting your monthly rent into a home instead? Our next guests are helping Bronxites realize their dreams of home ownership to leave renting behind. Joining us now to discuss the home buying process step by step are Adan D and Vanessa Villanueva, real estate agents at Moravilla Sales Team. Welcome, Adan and Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Of course. So I know you're also a partnership. You're also a couple. So, congrats on also doing business together. That's incredible.
Yes. Partners in life and business.
That's amazing. So, to start, for people who are not familiar, can you tell us about Moravilla Sales Team and your mission?
Absolutely. So thanks again for having us. So we are a husband and wife duo. Really, our mission is to make sure that everyone has access to reliable and credible resources. We are big on education and making sure that it's available to all. So we are also bilingual, including those of our team. And we really believe in reinvesting in our communities, making sure, again, that everyone has access to what should be wealth-building opportunities.
Sounds wonderful to me. And how has COVID-19 impacted your business and home buying in general, if you can share?
Absolutely. I mean, it's had an impact on so many levels, right? Because there's different sides to the business. Part of this business does involve the intimacy of, going somewhere and doing something like showing the house, right? Because very few people are going to buy a property without ever seeing it in person. And that obviously was a huge hurdle to deal with throughout the process. But COVID-19 in terms of the business came in waves, right? Because we had moments in the beginning where it was like, we're not doing showings because at the end of the day, safety is important. And we have families and we're helping families to go through a process. And there was points where it just wasn't happening, to be honest. As things got a little bit better, we were able to work around things using mostly technology. We went from processes that there was so much physical interaction to what can we eliminate from this process and use technology to do it virtually. Closings, appraisals,
even showings.
Even showings for
virtual
the most part, right? And also, what was the scrutiny to even get somebody in the door? The days of the big balloons and the open houses kind of had to stop. And we had to say, how can we eliminate all of that and just have people that are seriously trying to buy this house to come in and get out as fast as possible.
Thank you for sharing. Something that we mentioned was, of course, the home ownership rate here in the Bronx, which is pretty low. Can you share some of the benefits of home owning versus renting? And also, we'll discuss a little later on what some of those factors affecting Bronx ownership are.
Absolutely. So, one of the clear and most obvious one is, again, just building that wealth. Rent will continuously go up, right? Usually after a year, your leases see some sort of increase, and obviously varying, but average from 2 to 4%. So you have a really unstable sort of data or year-to-year living style versus the home ownership aspect. You have 30-year fixed mortgages or 15-year fixed mortgages, but something that is more consistent. And depending on the sort of property type that you purchase, you also have a means of offsetting some of those costs. So definitely having, again, that stability. And then just, again, reinvesting into your community. So you don't have, a consistent wave of changing. You have someone that's a little bit more deeply rooted into your community. And definitely more proactive in, in what happens there.
Yep. And I always like to, I give someone the example, right? Imagine I come to you and I say, listen, let's buy this car. All right. You're going to cover all the payments, but you only get to use it on Saturdays. I'm going to have it for the rest of the week. What do you think about that deal? And that's literally what renting is. I mean, to put it in a nutshell,
you definitely have a lot of restrictions.
Thank you for breaking that down. So, if somebody's listening and they want to know about the process, how does the home buying process really work? And what steps does Moravilla take people through?
Absolutely. So it's never just a cookie cutter format for everyone, right? It's a very intimate, customized process. So what we do is really sit down and analyze where you are, what your expectations are, and what are the needs and wants of you and your family. And then I really identify in those aspects so that we can make a game plan. Do we have to work on our credit and maybe save a little bit more? Are we ready to go into the, some of the home buyer workshops that we support and that we collaborate with? And then speaking to lenders. So we really try to break it down into more bite-sized, manageable pieces. So it's not this overlooming process and really intimidating. So we really try to, again, customize it to your needs. And if it is a 3-month plan, then perfect. If not, if it needs to go to a year, 2 years, then so be it.
Exactly.
But at least we know that we have a goal in mind.
And knowing that we're going to be there with you through that process. Because let's take away the transactional side of the business and let's identify that we're in this for the long run. So if it takes 2 years to bring that to fruition for you, then so be it. We'll work through that process. We'll get your credit up. We'll do whatever it takes. But understand that as long as you make the commitment, then we'll make it with you.
And what exactly is required in this process? Would you say that any Bronx site can own a home with the right preparation and support?
Yes, they make fun of me because I like to have little sayings. But here are my 5 Ps, right? The proper preparation prevents poor performance. This is a very complicated process, and anything that you're going to find in life that's worth having is not going to be easy. And home ownership is on that list. We just like to take something that's maybe a little overcomplicated and a bit intimidating to someone and break it down into steps. And going back to like Vanessa was saying, it's all about that custom plan for you because everybody's experience is a little bit different, right? There's always going to be the cliche, you're going to need a lender, you're going to need this, you're going to need that. That's for everybody. But what it takes to get there and how it's accomplished is where that real custom plan comes into place. So yes, absolutely. Any Bronx site that has that ambition can do it 100%.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing. And, it would be remiss of me not to bring up the historical illegal discriminatory practices of redlining on communities of color like ours here in the Bronx. Can you help us understand how it is at play in home ownership today?
Absolutely. So, as a person of color, we're a team of color. We obviously resonate. I'm a first generation American, and I have seen now being in this business the impact that home ownership can have on a family. We're talking about generational wealth. A lot of people that maybe don't know about redlining, obviously we could have an entire series on this topic, and I'm very passionate about it. But understand that basically, in a nutshell, the government at some point had an organization. They created these maps. They're called HOLC maps, and these maps basically identified where in a community it was desirable or not desirable to buy, which then had an impact on the ability for someone living in that area to get financing, okay? We're talking about having areas where it literally was written in stone by the federal government at some points that a person of color could not buy there. Now, is that happening now? Obviously not, right? But we're still feeling the effects of it. Yeah. This is an effect that is going to happen for generations. And that's part of when we talk about our mission statement and using the word of advocacy comes into play because it's like anything, right? It's cause and effect. What is the cause of redlining? The mistakes that the government made for many years. And what are the effects? We see them every day. And they go back to that home ownership rate that you were just speaking of when you started. That is a huge discrepancy. Yeah. And when you start understanding the impact of even your family owning one property, that is going to have a trickle effect on every generation to come that bears your name. And we lost that. And that's why our goal is to help as many people as possible to achieve that now to make a better tomorrow.
Definitely catch up for that lost
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Adan and Vanessa. And I think, as you mentioned, that could definitely be an effect on the percentages that we mentioned earlier. A lot of people can be intimidated to find out about this information, even reach out to Moravilla because they feel like they don't have the capacity or the information. But I'm glad to know that you're there to support Bronx sites in particular and provide that helping hand with this information. So, just to give more information to our folks listening, how is Moravilla helping ensure that people of color in the Bronx own more and learn more about home ownership?
So we are very passionate about what we do, if that doesn't come across already, but we are
I got chills right now. Literally.
So we are very passionate about what we do. And, we don't try to necessarily reinvent the wheel in that sense. There's community-based organizations that we collab with, right? So that they run, these home buyer workshops, that they offer them also in the language of those in the community, right? So, there's a large percentage of our clientele that are Spanish speaking, right? So it definitely helps being able to go to a home buyer workshop and learning about these resources in the language that they feel most comfortable in. So we absolutely support those organizations, and we encourage all of our clientele to attend them. If there's any grants, whether they're city-based, from the lenders that they're working with, or even from us, since we're affiliated with being of a National Association of Realtors, there's also grants that we offer to our clients as well. We try to pull that all together to really give them the best, not only the best experience, but the most informed and educated experience possible.
Well, remember what you said earlier? We were talking, and she mentioned something that I loved. It was like, knowledge is empowerment, right? And the bottom line is that, going back to what I said earlier, this is not an easy process, right? But understanding it and actually knowing what needs to be done is the only way that you'll ever be able to make a legitimate plan.
Absolutely. And being able to connect with people that you can trust in, right? That that they're going to steer you in the right direction and give you proper advice from a good place, right? So definitely being able to combine all of that.
It's been really wonderful meeting you both, Moravilla Sales Team. And I just realized that's a mix of both of your names, Morales and Villanueva.
Yes, absolutely. So that's definitely the experience we wanted, kind of get the 2 for 1.
Absolutely.
And it's like a play on the word maravilla, right?
Exactly. We love it because everybody that reads it has their own interpretation.
Yeah.
And then they have that bomb moment, like you said. They're like, oh, wait a minute.
I got you. Well, listen, it's been great speaking with you, and also learning that, you're an equitable and accessible, resource to our community in the Bronx. So before we go, how can people stay in touch with Moravilla and learn more about home ownership and stay in tune for your upcoming workshops and information sessions?
I mean, again, going back to the custom, just reach out to us. I think don't look for an event or a reason. Just call. I mean, that would be the easiest way. And obviously, we're on social media. We're on, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube.
Our website's also great, vast information.
Moravilla.com, absolutely. But, at the end of the day, my real challenge is like take 1 second, give us a call. We'll make an appointment. It'll take 10 or 15 minutes, and we can talk about you directly. And I think that's really what it takes, is just taking that first step and not being so worried or concerned whether you're qualified or not. Let's just get it going.
Got you. Thank you so much, Adan and Vanessa, for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good day.
You too. We'll be right back here on Open BXRX Tuesday. Welcome back. Today is Election Day, Tuesday, June 22nd. Did you know Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. is retiring after 12 years? It's now our civic duty to choose a new borough president today. We're also choosing a new mayor, comptroller, public advocate, city council members, and civic court judges. Polls will be open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. In order to give you more information before you vote, let's check out this segment featuring AARP. Welcome back. We are now just a few weeks away from the 2021 primary election, taking place on June 22nd here in New York City. There are a lot of open seats across the city and a lot to find out about this important race. AARP is providing access to information about the races in your neighborhood. Joining us now to share more about the upcoming primary election is Beth Finkel, State Director of AARP NY. Welcome, Beth. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. It's a big election.
Yeah, it's great to have you. We have a lot of important information to discuss now, so thank you. So as we shared, June 22nd is primary election day. Can you share why this election is so important for New York City?
It's hugely important. After this election, we are going to have almost a whole new government in New York City. Mayor, controller, public advocate, and in the city council, 75% of the seats on the New York City Council will be new council members. So this is such a wonderful opportunity for all New Yorkers to get out and vote and to share what's most important to them. The candidates you choose will reflect what's most important to you as you vote. And as I say that, I have to say this part a little sadly. We did some research on the last time there was an open mayoral primary vote in New York, which was back in 2013. That's when de Blasio won the primary.
Right.
And we did some research. Who voted in that election? 75% of the people who voted in that election were 50 years or older, 75%. That's why the information that we share on what 50 plus voters think, and by the way, there are 750,000 AARP members in the 5 boroughs. Their vote really counts. That's why we're calling this 50 plus voters count, because they really do. They are the most reliable segment.
Oh, absolutely. 75% is a huge percentage of our voters here in New York City in particular. So thank you for sharing that, Beth. Can we just go back to what the races are in this election? So you did mention a few of them. Can we go through the entire list just so that our viewers are familiar with what races are going to be about?
Sure. You've got the mayor. You've got the controller. You've got the public advocate. You also have the Manhattan DA, but that won't be in the Bronx. That will only be for Manhattanites. And as I said before, 75% of the city council races will not be incumbents. They'll be brand new people. So that's really important. The direction of New York City is really at a crucial point.
Right. And when we're considering, some of the challenges that 50 plus voters face, what are those challenges, especially during this pandemic, Beth?
Well, I think many of us are seeing a lot of ageism on the rise. And during the pandemic, when so many people lost their jobs or were scaled back, the 50 plus felt it in a very significant way. And we know that when the 50 plus lose their jobs, it's much harder for them to get back into the workplace. Another area of concern is isolation. I think all of us have looked at our friends and our neighbors and loved ones and the terrible burden of isolation that was on them because of the pandemic. And finally, food insecurity. And again, I think we all know about this. People in the Bronx know about this, that, people were really struggling to keep food on the table. And the city put up a valiant effort, and local community groups were just amazing at getting the food out. But still, people really struggled with food insecurity.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of movements have been happening, to help the community with food insecurity. And, it's something that has been exacerbated during the pandemic, something that our communities were already faced with prior. So I do understand that AARP did conduct a survey to collect some of the issues that voters 50 plus are concerned about in upcoming elections. Can you share those with us, Beth?
Sure, I'm not going to give you Bronx specific numbers, although we had New York City numbers. This is BronxNet. We want to give you the Bronx numbers.
Thank you.
So crime, 71% of people in the Bronx that we polled of 50 plus voters said they were very worried about crime. Number one issue. Number two issue, affordable housing. Again, not surprising at all. Number three was just affordability in general. And I think a lot of New Yorkers, actually, I think a lot of Americans are starting to worry about affordability in general. And then finally, disparities, racial and ethnic disparities. 59% of Bronx voters, 50 plus, said that they were very concerned about that. I would also, just one more thing I want to say, we looked at who was ahead in the race, and we looked at rankings, and of course this was a month or 6 weeks ago. And actually, it's interesting, the New York Times today had in it that our poll was one of the few independent, reliable polls that came out. We did it with Siena, which is a really well-known polling organization. But the point I want to make about this is, we're talking about the issues. Not everybody has made up their mind who they plan to vote for mayor. And I think it's really important. From our data, 26% of Democrats are still undecided, and 44% of Republicans are undecided about who they're going to vote for in the mayoral primaries. That's really important. And I think the candidates know that. And that's why they're out there hitting the pavement right now. So, and, people sometimes change their minds too. New things come to light. So, it's an important time.
Yes, and it's very important to note that these races are very packed. The mayoral race started with over 30 candidates, and now we've kind of narrowed it down a bit. But there are a lot of candidates to learn about, and I want to share with our viewers that AARP is seeking to bridge the voter education and information gap. Beth, can you share some of those ways that you're seeking to outreach to the community?
Oh, absolutely. So, of course, our website, which I know you put up before, I'm going to say it again and probably say it more than once. This is where you can get everything. And that's at www.aarp.org/votersnyc. I know it's at the bottom of your screen, but I'm going to say it again. www.aarp.org/Voters NYC. So on there, you're going to be able to see questions that we ask the candidates. We're also going to be sponsoring a lot of debates and forums. There's information about basic deadlines around voting. People need to know that the primary early voting actually starts on June 10th. So if you have made up your mind, it will be early voting will be available from June 10th to June 20th. And also, any registered voter can request a mail-in absentee ballot and vote safely from home here in New York, which is really important. The general election, I know, as you said, is the primary is on June 22nd, and Red Letter Day, November 2nd, is the full election. So that's that. And then I don't know if you ranked choice voting, which is brand new this year, right?
Yes, let's talk about ranked choice voting. So there are a few must-knows for this primary election, and if you can just help us share, more information on that, Beth, it would be very helpful.
So ranked choice voting, which also is known as RCV, for those of you who like those shortened forms. So ranked choice voting, RCV, is very important because you'll be able to rank your top 5 choices, which we've never had a chance to do before. So when you get your ballot, you're going to see it's clearly marked. You check the box for your number 1 choice. You check the box for your number 2 choice. You check the box for number 3, etc., number 4, and number 5. And the reason for that is that if the number 1 choice doesn't get over 50% of the vote, they will then tabulate across the board that second line of second choices. And it could validate the first choice, but it could be somebody else entirely who everybody else said, this is my favorite choice as number 2. And et cetera. That's going to keep going down. Now, the odds are that's not going to happen, but it certainly could happen. I have to say it probably all eyes will be on the New York City election this year because people are really curious how that might work. And I think in city council races, you're going to see it play out in a lot of really dramatic ways.
Oh.
Right? But that means the voters have to be so much more educated because they don't just walk in the poll and say, okay, this is my first choice. Although, by the way, I do want to make sure people understand, if you want to go in there and just vote for your first choice and not rank the others, absolutely do that. If you really feel so passionately about one person and you don't want to get involved with the ranking, you may do that, but just know that if they fall short, it's going to be a problem if it goes to second, third, fourth, and fifth choices.
Absolutely. Thank you for those reminders, Beth. And we'll make sure to play our new PSA here on BronxNet. We have a PSA about ranked choice voting that is
excellent.
Very informative, and we'll make sure to share that with our viewers right after this segment. But I also wanted to just ask you, Beth, to please just send the message out to our voters 50 plus and the community about the importance of voting and participating in these primary elections coming up on June 22nd.
Well, as I said before, literally, we are going to have a whole new New York City government. 75% of the council seats, but new mayor, new comptroller. We'll end up with a new speaker because the current speaker is terming off. And so the city council members will choose the new speaker for the city council, which is an incredibly important role, the way New York government runs. And then we have the public advocate, which of course we do have an incumbent running on the public advocate line. So we might not have somebody new there.
Right. And finally, Beth, one more time, where can we go to find out more information on the upcoming primary election candidates and more via AARP New York?
Sure. You go to www.aarp.org/votersnyc.
Thank you, Beth, again so much for joining us today and sharing this information.
Really important.
Of course. Beth Finkel is the state director at AARP NY. Just a reminder, primary election day is on June 22nd. Please don't forget and visit aarp.org/votenyc for more information. We'll be right back here on Open BXRX Tuesday. That's all for our show today. Don't forget to have your vote count and your voice heard today. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.